The morning of June 12, 2018, started like any other Tuesday in the working-class neighborhood of Riverside, a small community on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Children played on sidewalks, parents rushed to work, and the summer sun promised another beautiful Pacific Northwest day. But for one little boy, this would be the last normal morning he would ever know. 3-year-old Charlie Mitchell, known affectionately to his family as Chuck, was a bright-eyed toddler with curly brown hair and an infectious laugh that could light up any room. He loved dinosaurs, particularly T-Rex, and never went anywhere without his stuffed green stegosaurus named Spike. Charlie had dimples that appeared whenever he smiled, and according to his grandmother, Helen Rodriguez, he smiled constantly. That boy was pure sunshine, Helen would later tell investigators, tears streaming down her weathered face. He could make friends with anyone. He'd walk up to strangers at the grocery store and just start talking about his dinosaurs. He trusted everyone. That's what breaks my heart the most, he trusted everyone. Charlie's mother, 17-year-old Jessica Mitchell, was just a child herself when she gave birth to him. Jessica had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home throughout her childhood, never finding stability or the love every child deserves. She dropped out of Riverside High School in her sophomore year when she discovered she was pregnant, and her life had been a struggle ever since. Jessica lived with her mother, Helen, in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Riverside. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, police were called regularly for domestic disputes, drug activity, and theft, but it was all Helen could afford on her salary as a grocery store cashier. The apartment was cramped but clean, and Helen did her best to provide Charlie with a stable home even as Jessica struggled with the responsibilities of young motherhood. Those who knew Jessica described her as sweet but troubled, a girl who had never really had a chance to be young. She had been in and out of the juvenile justice system for minor offenses, shoplifting, truancy, possession of marijuana. She made poor choices, often falling for the wrong men, seeking the love and validation she had never received growing up. In early 2018, Jessica met a man who would change everything. His name was Marcus Henderson, though he would later be discovered using at least 4 different aliases: Mark Harris, Marcus Johnson, Michael Henderson, and Mario Harrison. He was 32 years old, nearly twice Jessica's age, with a criminal record that should have sent up immediate red flags. Marcus was tall and muscular, with tattoos covering both arms and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jawline. He had served time in Oregon State Penitentiary for aggravated assault and had multiple arrests for domestic violence, drug possession, and theft. He moved through life leaving destruction in his wake, a predator who preyed on vulnerable women. Jessica met Marcus at a convenience store in February 2018. He was charming at first, buying her cigarettes and telling her she was beautiful. For a lonely teenage mother who received little attention or affection, Marcus's interest felt like salvation. Within 2 weeks, he had moved into Helen's apartment, despite her strong objections. "I didn't trust him from the moment I laid eyes on him," Helen later testified. "There was something wrong about him. The way he looked at people, like he was always calculating something. I told Jessica he couldn't stay, but she wouldn't listen. She said she loved him, that he was going to help her with Charlie. I should have done more. God forgive me, I should have done more." Marcus's true nature revealed itself quickly. Within a month, neighbors reported hearing screaming matches coming from the Rodriguez apartment. Police were called 3 times in March alone for domestic disturbances. Each time, Jessica refused to press charges, insisting that everything was fine, that it was just a misunderstanding. But things were far from fine. Marcus was violent and controlling. He isolated Jessica from her few friends, monitored her phone calls, and forbade her from leaving the apartment without his permission. He didn't work, spending his days drinking and playing video games while Helen supported the household. And then there was his relationship with little Charlie. From the beginning, Marcus showed nothing but contempt for the boy. He called Charlie the brat and your mistake, constantly complaining about the child's crying, his toys scattered around the apartment, the attention Jessica gave him. Marcus would yell at Charlie for the smallest infractions, spilling juice, being too loud, asking too many questions. Helen witnessed Marcus grab Charlie roughly by the arm on multiple occasions, leaving bruises. She saw him shove the boy into his bedroom and lock the door when Charlie annoyed him. She heard him screaming at the 3-year-old in language that would make a sailor blush. But every time Helen confronted Jessica, the teenage mother made excuses. "He's just stressed," Jessica would say. "He's had a hard life. He doesn't mean it. He's getting better. I'm working with him." But Marcus wasn't getting better. He was getting worse. In early June 2018, Helen Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She took a job at a warehouse across town that paid $3 more per hour than her grocery store position. The extra money would help the struggling family, but the new job required her to work overnight shifts, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. This meant leaving Jessica, Marcus, and Charlie alone in the apartment every night. "I thought about quitting every single day," Helen later said. "Something in my gut told me not to leave them alone with him. But we needed the money. We were barely making rent. I thought Jessica would protect Charlie. I thought wrong." On the night of June 11, 2018, Helen left for work at 10:30 p.m. Charlie was already asleep in his small bedroom, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Jessica was watching television, and Marcus was drinking beer on the couch. Helen kissed her grandson's forehead, told Jessica to call her if anything happened, and left for her overnight shift. It would be the last time she would see Charlie alive. What happened in that apartment over the next several hours remains unclear, buried beneath layers of lies, contradictions, and deliberate obfuscation. But investigators would later piece together a timeline that painted a horrifying picture. According to Jessica's initial statements to police, everything was normal that night. Charlie slept peacefully. She and Marcus watched television and went to bed around midnight. When she woke up around 8 a.m. on June 12, Charlie was gone. But this story would change. Multiple times. Each version contradicting the last, each one revealing new horrors. The truth, as investigators would discover, was far darker than anyone could have imagined. When Helen Rodriguez returned home from her overnight shift at 7:30 a.m. on June 12, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The apartment was too quiet. Charlie should have been awake by now, watching his favorite cartoon, Dinosaur Adventures, and asking for his breakfast of chocolate chip pancakes, his favorite. Helen walked into the living room and found Jessica sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television, which wasn't even turned on. Her daughter's eyes were red and swollen, her face puffy from crying. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Charlie?" Helen asked, her grandmother's instinct already screaming that something terrible had happened. Jessica didn't respond immediately. She just kept staring at that blank television screen, her hands trembling in her lap. "Jessica." Helen's voice rose sharply. "Where is Charlie?" "He's gone," Jessica finally whispered, so softly Helen almost didn't hear her. "Gone? What do you mean gone? Gone where?" "Marcus. Marcus took him." The words hit Helen like a physical blow. "Took him? Took him where? When? What are you talking about?" Jessica began crying harder, her whole body shaking. Between sobs, she told her mother a story that made no sense. She claimed that Marcus had left with Charlie around midnight, saying he was taking the boy to stay with his sister in Seattle for a few days. Jessica said she had protested, had told Marcus that Charlie was too young to go away without her, but Marcus had insisted. He said the boy needed to get out of the cramped apartment, needed fresh air and a change of scenery. Helen's mind reeled. "And you just let him? You let a man you've known for 4 months take your 3-year-old son to Seattle in the middle of the night?" "He said he'd be back in a few days," Jessica sobbed. "He said Charlie would have fun. I thought I thought it would be okay. Helen grabbed her phone and dialed 911. The operator who answered would later describe Helen's voice as controlled panic, a woman trying desperately to stay calm while reporting the worst possible news. My grandson is missing, Helen said into the phone. He's 3 years old. A man took him last night and we don't know where he is. Riverside Police Department dispatched officers immediately. Detective Sarah Chen and her partner, Detective Robert Williams, arrived at the Rodriguez apartment within 20 minutes. Chen was a 15-year veteran of the force, specializing in crimes against children. She had seen terrible things in her career, but something about this case immediately set off alarm bells. Jessica's story didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Detective Chen sat down with Jessica at the small kitchen table and began asking questions. What was Marcus's full name? Where exactly in Seattle was his sister? What was the sister's name? What was her address? What kind of car did Marcus drive? When exactly did he leave? Why did he take Charlie in the middle of the night instead of waiting until morning? Jessica's answers were vague and contradictory. She said Marcus's sister's name was Sarah or Sharon, something like that. She didn't know the address. Marcus didn't have a car, he must have taken a bus or gotten a ride from someone. He left around midnight, or maybe it was earlier, around 11. Or possibly later, around 1 a.m. Jessica, Detective Chen said gently but firmly, I need you to tell me the truth. When did you last see Charlie? Jessica broke down completely at this question. I don't know, she wailed. I don't remember. Everything is confused. Marcus was yelling at me. Charlie was crying. Everything happened so fast. Detective Williams stepped out of the apartment and made a phone call to the department. We need to find Marcus Henderson immediately, he told his sergeant. And we need to treat this as a critical missing child case. Something is very wrong here. Within hours, the Riverside Police Department had mobilized a full search operation. Amber alerts were issued across Oregon and Washington. Marcus Henderson's photograph, a mugshot from his last arrest, was distributed to every law enforcement agency in the Pacific Northwest. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on every door, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual the previous night. What they discovered was deeply troubling. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, who lived in the apartment directly below the Rodriguez family, reported hearing loud arguing around 10 p.m. on June 11. She heard a man's voice yelling, a woman crying, and most disturbing of all, a child screaming. The screaming lasted for approximately 10 minutes. Then suddenly stopped. After that, she heard heavy footsteps, a door slamming, and then silence. I almost called the police, Mrs. Patterson told investigators, wringing her hands. But I didn't want to cause trouble. They'd had arguments before. I thought it would blow over. Oh God, I should have called. That poor baby. Another neighbor, 23-year-old Travis Martinez, reported seeing Marcus Henderson leaving the apartment building around 11:30 p.m. on June 11. Marcus was alone. He was carrying a large black duffel bag and walking quickly toward the parking lot. Travis thought nothing of it at the time. Marcus often came and went at odd hours. Did you see a child with him? Detective Chen asked. No, Travis said. He was definitely alone. Just him and that bag. How big was the bag? Travis demonstrated with his hands. The bag was approximately 3 feet long, large enough to hold sports equipment or camping gear. Large enough, Detective Chen realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach, to hold a small child. By evening of June 12, police had located Marcus Henderson. He was found at a motel on the outskirts of Riverside, just 15 miles from the Rodriguez apartment. When officers burst into his room with weapons drawn, Marcus was alone. There was no sign of Charlie. Marcus was arrested immediately and brought in for questioning. What followed was an interrogation that would last nearly 12 hours and produce some of the most disturbing and contradictory statements investigators had ever heard. If you're finding this story as disturbing as we are, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us reach more people who need to hear Charlie's story. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our true crime investigations. Your support helps us continue bringing these important cases to light. Marcus Henderson sat in interrogation room 2 at the Riverside Police Department. With an arrogance that shocked the detectives. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a slight smirk on his face as if this were all an amusing inconvenience rather than a serious investigation into a missing child. Detective Sarah Chen sat across from him, her face carefully neutral despite the rage building inside her. Next to her, Detective Williams operated the video camera that would record everything Marcus said, every lie, every contradiction, every moment of his performance. "Marcus," Chen began, "we need to talk about Charlie Mitchell." "Where is he?" Marcus shrugged. "With my sister in Seattle, like I told the girl." "Jessica?" "Yeah, her. I told her I was taking the kid for a few days. Give her a break. She's always complaining about how hard it is, being a mom so young. I did her a favor." "What's your sister's name?" "Tina." "Tina Henderson?" "No, she's married." "Tina Morrison. Or Martin. One of those." "You don't know your own sister's last name?" Marcus's expression flickered with irritation. "We're not close. Haven't seen her in years. But she said she'd take the kid for a while." "How did you contact her if you haven't seen her in years?" "Phone." "What's her number?" "Don't remember. It's in my phone." "Where's your phone?" "Lost it." Detective Chen leaned forward. "Marcus, we checked. You don't have a sister named Tina. In fact, according to our records, you're an only child. Your mother died when you were 7, and your father is currently serving time in California for armed robbery. So I'll ask you again, where is Charlie?" The smirk faded from Marcus's face. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "You got bad information. I got a half-sister from my dad's first marriage." "What's her maiden name?" "How should I know?" "I told you, we're not close." "Then why would you take a 3-year-old boy to stay with someone you barely know?" "Because Jessica wanted a break." "Jessica says she didn't want you to take Charlie. She says you took him against her wishes." "She's lying." Multiple neighbors heard arguing in that apartment on the night of June 11th. They heard a child screaming. "What was happening, Marcus?" "The kid was having a tantrum. He didn't want to go to bed." "Kids scream. It's what they do." Mrs. Patterson said the screaming stopped very suddenly. "What made it stop?" "I don't know. He fell asleep, I guess." "What time did you leave the apartment with Charlie?" "Around midnight. A witness saw you leaving at 11:30 p.m. You were alone. You were carrying a large black duffel bag." "The witness is wrong." "The witness was very certain." "Then he's a liar or he's mistaken." "I left at midnight with the kid." "Where is that black duffel bag now?" "What bag?" "The bag you were seen carrying." "I don't know what you're talking about." Detective Chen opened a folder and pulled out several photographs. They showed the interior of Marcus's motel room. "These were taken when we arrested you this afternoon. We found that black duffel bag in your closet. It's been processed by our forensic team. Would you like to know what they found?" Marcus's face had gone pale. "I want a lawyer." "We found blood, Marcus. Inside that bag. And hair. Small brown hairs consistent with a child's hair. We're running DNA tests right now. What do you think they're going to tell us?" "I want a lawyer," Marcus repeated, but his voice had lost its confidence. Where is Charlie Mitchell? I want a lawyer. A 3-year-old boy is missing. His grandmother is terrified. His mother is falling apart. You're the last person seen with him. Just tell us where he is. If something happened, if there was an accident, tell us now. Help us find him. Marcus stared at the table for a long moment. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something colder and more calculating. I didn't hurt that kid, he said slowly. But I didn't take him to Seattle either. I gave him to someone. Who? A couple. They wanted a kid. They couldn't have one of their own. They offered me money. Detective Chen felt her stomach drop. You're telling me you sold Charlie? I'm saying I found him a better home. That apartment was no place for a kid. Jessica's a mess. The grandmother works all the time. I did the kid a favor. Who were these people? Don't know their names. Met them online. Where online? Some chat room. Don't remember which one. How much did they pay you? 5,000. Where's the money? Spent it. In less than 24 hours? Had debts to pay. Marcus, we've checked your bank account. There's been no large deposit. We've checked your known associates. Nobody reports lending you money recently. You're lying. I'm telling you what happened. No, you're telling me a story. And it's a bad one. Charlie Mitchell didn't go to Seattle, and you didn't sell him to a mysterious couple online. So I'll ask you one more time, what did you do to that little boy? Marcus leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms again. Get me a lawyer. I'm done talking. And that was it. Despite 12 hours of interrogation, despite mounting evidence, despite the urgency of finding a missing child, Marcus Henderson refused to say another word without legal representation. But the investigation was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a turn that would shock everyone involved. As detectives worked around the clock to find Charlie Mitchell, they began reconstructing a timeline of events. What they discovered was a series of lies, omissions, and deliberate misdirections that suggested something far more sinister than a simple kidnapping. First, they focused on Jessica Mitchell. The teenage mother's story had been inconsistent from the beginning, and under continued questioning, it began to fall apart completely. Detective Chen brought Jessica in for a second interview on June 13. The day after Charlie's disappearance was reported. This time, Chen wasn't gentle. Jessica, we know Marcus didn't take Charlie to Seattle. We know he didn't sell him to a couple online. Those are lies he told us, and they're not going to help us find your son. I need you to tell me the truth about what happened on June 11th. Jessica stared at her hands, twisting a tissue into shreds. I told you everything I know. No, you haven't. You said Marcus left with Charlie around midnight. But a neighbor saw Marcus leaving alone at 11:30. You said Charlie was fine when you went to bed. But neighbors heard a child screaming around 10 p.m. You said you woke up at 8 a.m. and realized Charlie was gone. But your mother says you were already awake and visibly upset when she got home at 7:30. These aren't small discrepancies, Jessica. These are major contradictions. Why are you lying? Tears streamed down Jessica's face. I'm scared. Scared of what? Marcus. He said if I told anyone what really happened, he'd kill me. He said he'd kill my mom too. Marcus is in jail. He can't hurt you now. But Charlie is still missing, and every hour that passes makes it less likely we'll find him alive. Please, Jessica. Tell me the truth. What Jessica revealed over the next 2 hours was devastating. According to her new statement, Jessica and Marcus had gotten into a violent argument on the evening of June 11th. The fight started over money. Marcus wanted Jessica to steal cash from her mother's wallet, and Jessica refused. The argument escalated. Marcus grabbed Jessica by the throat and slammed her against the wall. Charlie, hearing his mother's screams, came running out of his bedroom. He was crying, begging Marcus to stop hurting his mommy. Marcus, enraged by the child's interruption, turned his violence toward the boy. He grabbed Charlie, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. He picked him up and threw him. Just threw him across the room like he was a toy. Charlie hit his head on the coffee table. There was blood. So much blood. Detective Chen felt her heart racing. What happened then? Charlie was crying so hard. He was holding his head and there was blood running through his fingers. I tried to go to him but Marcus grabbed me. He said I'd better shut the kid up or he'd shut him up permanently. I picked Charlie up and took him to the bathroom. I tried to clean the blood, tried to see how bad it was, but he wouldn't stop crying. Was Charlie conscious? Yes, but he was confused. His eyes looked wrong. He kept saying his head hurt. I wanted to call 911 but Marcus wouldn't let me. He said if the hospital saw Charlie's injury, they'd call CPS and I'd lose him. He said it was my fault for making him angry. What time was this? Around 9:30, maybe 10. What happened next? Jessica's crying intensified. I put Charlie in his bed. I gave him his dinosaur and told him to rest. He was still crying but quieter now. I thought if he just slept, he'd be okay in the morning. Kids are resilient, right? They bounce back from injuries. Jessica, a head injury serious enough to cause significant bleeding needs immediate medical attention. I know that now. But Marcus kept saying it was fine, that head wounds bleed a lot even when they're not serious. He said if I called anyone, they'd take Charlie away from me forever. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. When did you last see Charlie alive? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Jessica's face crumpled. I checked on him around 11. He was sleeping. At least, I thought he was sleeping. He was so still. I tried to wake him up to make sure he was okay, but he wouldn't wake up. I shook him and called his name but he wouldn't open his eyes. Why didn't you call 911 then? Marcus said it was too late. He said if Charlie was hurt that bad, calling an ambulance wouldn't help. He said all it would do is get us both arrested. He said the police would think I hurt Charlie, that they'd put me in jail and I'd never see daylight again. What did Marcus do? He went into Charlie's room. He was in there for maybe 10 minutes. When he came out, he had that black duffel bag. He said he was going to take care of everything. He told me to go to bed, to act like nothing happened, and to tell anyone who asked that he'd taken Charlie to Seattle. Did you see what was in the bag? Jessica shook her head violently, as if she could shake away the memory. No. I didn't want to know. I couldn't. I couldn't look. What time did Marcus leave? Around 11:30. And you didn't call the police until your mother got home the next morning? Marcus said he'd be back. He said he was fixing everything. He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I went to prison for killing my own son. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I know I should have called someone. I know I should have done something. But I was terrified and I thought maybe he really was fixing it somehow. Detective Chen leaned back in her chair, trying to process what she'd just heard. If Jessica's story was true, and it had the ring of truth in a way her previous stories hadn't, then Charlie Mitchell had likely died on the evening of June 11th, possibly from a traumatic head injury inflicted by Marcus Henderson. But where was the body? The search for Charlie Mitchell became one of the largest missing child investigations in Oregon state history. Over the next several weeks, hundreds of volunteers joined law enforcement in combing through every possible location where Marcus Henderson might have disposed of a body. The timeline established by investigators suggested that Marcus had left the apartment at approximately 11:30 p.m. on June 11, carrying a black duffel bag that likely contained Charlie's body. He had been spotted at his motel room by 1 a.m. on June 12, giving him roughly 90 minutes to dispose of the turn. How far could someone drive in 90 minutes? With traffic, probably no more than 40 or 50 miles total, 25 miles out and 25 miles back. This gave investigators a search radius of approximately 25 miles from the Rodriguez apartment. The problem was that within that radius lay thousands of potential dump sites, forests, rivers, abandoned buildings, construction sites, parks, and rural areas with limited visibility and access. Detective Chen coordinated with the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, bringing in additional resources and expertise. Cadaver dogs were deployed to search areas of particular interest. Dive teams searched the Columbia River and several smaller bodies of water. Volunteers organized by Charlie's grandmother Helen walked grid patterns through forests and fields, looking for any sign of the missing boy. Meanwhile, forensic teams were processing evidence from multiple locations. The black duffel bag found in Marcus's motel room contained blood and hair that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Charlie Mitchell. The quantity of blood suggested a significant injury, possibly fatal. Jessica's apartment was processed as a crime scene. Luminol testing revealed blood spatter on the living room wall and carpet that had been cleaned but not completely removed. The blood was consistent with Charlie's DNA profile. The coffee table showed impact damage and trace blood evidence. Charlie's bedroom told its own tragic story. His small bed still held his stuffed Stegosaurus, Spike. The pillowcase showed blood staining. A child's handprint in blood was visible on the wall next to the bed, as if Charlie had reached out for help. Marcus Henderson's phone records provided crucial evidence. Although he had claimed to have lost his phone, investigators recovered it from his motel room. The data showed no calls or messages about taking Charlie to Seattle or arranging any kind of adoption. It did show that Marcus had searched online for information about disposing of bodies, about how long it takes for a body to decompose, and about whether cadaver dogs can detect bodies underwater. Most damningly, his phone's GPS data revealed his movements on the night of June 11. After leaving the apartment at 11:30 p.m., Marcus had driven to Willow Creek Forest, a densely wooded area about 20 miles south of Riverside. He had spent approximately 30 minutes there, from 12 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. Then he returned directly to his motel. Search teams descended on Willow Creek Forest. The area was rugged and difficult to navigate, with thick undergrowth, steep ravines, and numerous caves and hollow logs where a small body could be hidden. Cadaver dogs alerted at several locations, indicating the possible presence of human remains, but extensive digging and searching found nothing. The forest covered nearly 10,000 acres. Finding a small child's body in such terrain was like searching for a needle in a haystack, made worse by the fact that animals could have scattered remains or moved them from the initial dump site. As days turned into weeks, hope of finding Charlie alive faded completely. The investigation shifted from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. Detectives knew they were looking for a body now, not a living child. But without remains, without definitive proof of death, the legal case against Marcus Henderson was complicated. This is such a difficult case to cover, but it's so important that we don't forget about Charlie. If you believe this story needs to be heard, please share this video with your friends and family. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. We cover cases like this because these children deserve justice and their stories deserve to be told. As investigators dug deeper into the circumstances surrounding Charlie Mitchell's disappearance, they uncovered a revelation that added another layer of tragedy and complexity to an already horrific case. During the course of standard evidence collection, DNA samples were taken from Jessica Mitchell, Helen Rodriguez, and Marcus Henderson. The samples from Jessica and Helen were necessary to establish definitive genetic matches with any remains that might be found. The sample from Marcus was taken to compare against evidence found at the crime scene. But the DNA analysis revealed something unexpected. Marcus Henderson was not just Jessica's boyfriend. He was Charlie's biological father. The revelation hit the investigation like a bombshell. When Detective Chen confronted Jessica with this information, the teenage mother initially denied it. Then, as evidence was presented, she broke down completely. "I didn't know," Jessica sobbed. "I swear to God, I didn't know." "How could you not know?" Chen asked, trying to keep the judgment out of her voice. The story that emerged was heartbreaking. Jessica had met Marcus not in February 2018, as she had originally claimed, but 4 years earlier, in 2014. She had been 13 years old. Marcus, then 28, had befriended her at a community center where Jessica spent time after school to avoid her chaotic foster home. Marcus had groomed Jessica over several months, buying her gifts, paying attention to her, making her feel special. By the time he initiated a sexual relationship with her, Jessica believed she was in love. She was 13. He was 28. Jessica became pregnant at 14. She didn't tell Marcus, afraid he would leave her. She didn't tell her foster parents, afraid they would send her away. She didn't tell anyone until she was 6 months along and the pregnancy was undeniable. When Jessica gave birth to Charlie in March 2015, she claimed not to know who the father was. She had been placed in a group home for pregnant teens, where she received support and counseling. After Charlie's birth, she was placed with her biological mother, Helen Rodriguez, who had gotten her life together after years of addiction and was willing to take in both her daughter and grandson. Jessica lost contact with Marcus after the pregnancy became known. He had disappeared from her life, likely aware that their relationship could land him in prison for statutory rape. Jessica had other boyfriends over the years, and she genuinely believed that one of them might be Charlie's father. She had never pursued paternity testing. When Marcus reappeared in her life in February 2018, Jessica didn't initially recognize him. He had gained weight, grown a beard, and was using the name Mark Harris. By the time she realized who he was, she was already emotionally involved with him again. And she still didn't know he was Charlie's father. Marcus, according to Jessica, never showed any recognition that Charlie might be his son. He treated the boy with contempt from the beginning, showing no paternal feelings whatsoever. Did he know? Detective Chen asked. Did Marcus know Charlie was his son? I don't think so, Jessica said. How could he? I didn't even know. But further investigation suggested otherwise. Detectives discovered that Marcus had been present at the hospital when Charlie was born. He had been listed on hospital visitor logs as Michael Harrison, friend of family. He had seen the baby. Nurses reported that he had seemed agitated and uncomfortable, leaving quickly. It seemed likely that Marcus had suspected Charlie might be his son but had never confirmed it. When he re-entered Jessica's life 3 years later, he may have recognized Charlie's resemblance to himself but chose to ignore or deny the connection. This revelation added a disturbing dimension to Charlie's murder. Not only had Marcus killed a 3-year-old child, but he had killed his own biological son. The violence took on an even more monstrous character, a father murdering his own child rather than face responsibility for him. The statutory rape charges were added to Marcus's growing list of crimes. Even if they couldn't prove murder without a body, they had him on felony rape of a child, which carried a sentence of up to 20 years. But prosecutors wanted the murder charge. They wanted justice for Charlie. And for that, they needed evidence that the boy was dead. Over the months following his arrest, Marcus Henderson told investigators at least 6 different versions of what happened to Charlie Mitchell. Each story contradicted the last. Each one was designed to minimize his culpability while providing no useful information about where Charlie might be found. The Seattle Sister. This was Marcus's initial claim, that he had taken Charlie to stay with his sister in Seattle. This story fell apart immediately when investigators confirmed Marcus had no sister. Marcus's second story was that he had sold Charlie to a couple he met online who wanted to adopt. He couldn't provide names, screenshots of conversations, or any evidence this couple existed. Bank records showed no large deposits. This story was quickly dismissed as fiction. After weeks in custody, Marcus's attorney arranged a proffer session where Marcus offered a third version. In this telling, Charlie's death was completely accidental. Marcus claimed that Charlie had been jumping on the bed, fell off, and hit his head. Marcus panicked, knowing his criminal record would make it look like murder, so he disposed of the body. When investigators pointed out that Jessica had witnessed Marcus throw Charlie across the room, Marcus modified the story. Yes, he had thrown the boy, but not hard. It was just to get him to stop crying. The resulting injury and death were still accidental. "Where did you put him?" Detective Chen asked. "I don't remember exactly. I was panicking. It was dark. Somewhere in the woods. We've searched Willow Creek Forest extensively. We've found nothing. Then I guess I remember wrong. Maybe it wasn't there." A month later, Marcus changed his story again. Now he claimed he had put Charlie's body in the Columbia River, weighted down with rocks. The current must have carried the remains far downriver, which is why they hadn't been found. Dive teams searched the river near the boat launch closest to Marcus's route, but found nothing. Experts pointed out that a small body weighted with rocks would likely have become lodged in the riverbed or caught on debris, making it detectable. Marcus's timeline also didn't support a trip to the river. There wasn't enough time between leaving the apartment and arriving at the motel. In yet another version, Marcus claimed he had called a friend to help him dispose of Charlie's body. This mysterious friend, whom Marcus refused to name at first, had taken the body and buried it somewhere Marcus didn't know about. When pressed for a name, Marcus provided Jimmy Thompson or Tommy Johnson or possibly Johnny Thomas. The name changed each time he told the story. Investigators found no evidence of any calls to potential accomplices on Marcus's phone records. No Jimmy Thompson, Tommy Johnson, or Johnny Thomas matching any description Marcus provided existed in any database. The accomplice story was just another lie. In perhaps the most disturbing version, Marcus claimed he had burned Charlie's body in a barrel at an abandoned industrial site. He said he stayed there for hours making sure everything burned to ash, then scattered the ashes. When detectives asked him to identify the location, he became vague, saying he couldn't remember exactly where it was, somewhere near some railroad tracks. Investigators checked every abandoned industrial site within Marcus's possible travel radius. They found no evidence of recent fires large enough to cremate a body. Forensic experts pointed out that cremating a human body requires sustained temperatures of at least 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, temperatures that cannot be achieved in a barrel with ordinary combustibles. The story was impossible. With each new story, Marcus seemed to be testing the waters, trying to find a narrative that would explain Charlie's disappearance without leading investigators to any actual evidence. He was buying time, gambling, that without a body, prosecutors wouldn't be able to prove murder. But Marcus underestimated the determination of law enforcement and the strength of circumstantial evidence. Prosecuting a murder without a body is one of the most challenging tasks in criminal law. Historically, defense attorneys have successfully argued that without physical proof of death, reasonable doubt exists that the victim might still be alive somewhere. However, in recent decades, prosecutors have become increasingly successful at securing murder convictions in no-body cases by building overwhelming circumstantial evidence that death occurred and that the defendant was responsible. District Attorney Rebecca Morrison assigned the Charlie Mitchell case to her most experienced prosecutor, Deputy DA James Keller. Keller had successfully prosecuted 2 previous no-body murder cases and had studied the legal strategies that worked best in such circumstances. The prosecution's case would rest on several pillars of evidence. The blood evidence found in the apartment and in Marcus's duffel bag was substantial enough to indicate that Charlie had suffered a life-threatening injury. Forensic pathologists testified that the amount of blood loss suggested a severe head trauma that would have required immediate emergency medical intervention to have any chance of survival. The fact that no such intervention occurred made death extremely likely. Marcus's actions indicated consciousness of guilt. Marcus's behavior after Charlie's disappearance showed all the classic signs of someone who had committed murder and was trying to cover it up. He lied repeatedly about Charlie's whereabouts. He disposed of evidence, the duffel bag still containing Charlie's blood. He researched body disposal methods online. His GPS data showed him traveling to a remote location in the middle of the night. He never reported Charlie missing or sought medical help. He threatened Jessica to prevent her from reporting. Marcus had demonstrated violent hostility toward Charlie throughout his time living with the family. He had a history of violence. He was alone with Charlie when the fatal injury occurred. He had motive, Charlie was a burden he didn't want, and possibly a reminder of his statutory rape of Jessica, and opportunity. Child abuse experts would testify about the pattern of escalating violence that typically precedes child murder. Search and rescue experts would explain why, despite extensive searching, bodies are sometimes never recovered, particularly when the perpetrator has time to carefully conceal remains in remote areas. The failure to find a body did not mean death had not occurred. Perhaps the most powerful argument was the simplest: Charlie Mitchell, if alive, would be somewhere. He was 3 years old, far too young to survive on his own. If Marcus had given him to someone else, that person would have come forward after seeing the extensive media coverage of the case. If Charlie had somehow wandered away or been kidnapped by a stranger, there would be some evidence, some sighting, some trace of him. The complete absence of any sign that Charlie was alive anywhere was itself powerful evidence that he was dead. District Attorney Morrison made the decision to charge Marcus Henderson with aggravated murder, along with a host of other charges: kidnapping, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, child abuse resulting in death, and statutory rape. The prosecution would argue for the maximum sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marcus Henderson's trial began on March 15, 2020, nearly 2 years after Charlie Mitchell disappeared. The case had received extensive media coverage, making jury selection challenging. It took 3 weeks to impanel a jury of 12 individuals who could fairly evaluate the evidence despite the emotionally charged nature of the case. The prosecution's case took 4 weeks to present. James Keller methodically built his argument piece by piece, creating a narrative that was impossible to ignore despite the absence of a body. The trial opened with devastating testimony from Helen Rodriguez. Charlie's grandmother took the stand wearing a button with Charlie's picture pinned to her jacket. In a voice that trembled but never broke, she described her grandson's personality, his love of dinosaurs, his trust in everyone he met. "Charlie was the light of my life," Helen testified. "Every day after work, no matter how tired I was, I'd come home and he'd run to me with his arms spread wide, yelling, 'Grandma! Grandma!' He'd tell me about his day, show me his toys, ask me a million questions. He was curious about everything. He wanted to know how birds fly, why the sky is blue, where the moon goes during the day. He was smart and sweet and innocent. And that man," she pointed at Marcus with a shaking finger, "that man took him from us." Jessica Mitchell's testimony was even more painful to watch. The now 19-year-old mother looked years older than her age, worn down by guilt and grief. She recounted in detail the events of June 11, 2018, describing Marcus's violence toward Charlie and her own paralysis in the face of it. Defense attorney Robert Chambers tried to paint Jessica as an unreliable witness, pointing out her multiple conflicting statements and her failure to immediately report Charlie's injury. But under cross-examination, Jessica never wavered from the core facts: Marcus had violently assaulted Charlie, causing a serious head injury, and Marcus had removed Charlie from the apartment in a duffel bag while telling her the boy was likely dead. "Why didn't you call 911?" Chambers asked, his voice dripping with judgment. "I was 17 years old," Jessica responded, tears streaming down her face. I was terrified. Marcus told me that if I called anyone, I'd go to prison for murder. He said nobody would believe me, that they'd think I hurt my own son. I know I should have called. I know I made a terrible mistake. I live with that guilt every single day. But Marcus is the one who hurt Charlie. Marcus is the one who took him away. Marcus is the one who killed my baby. The forensic evidence was damning. Expert after expert testified about the blood evidence, the timeline, the physical impossibility of Charlie surviving such an injury without immediate medical care. Dr. Patricia Walsh, a forensic pathologist, testified that based on the blood loss patterns, Charlie had likely suffered either a skull fracture or severe intracranial bleeding, either of which could be fatal within hours without treatment. Could the child have survived? Prosecutor Keller asked. Without immediate emergency medical intervention including possible surgery? No, the injury described and evidenced by the blood loss would have been fatal within 6 to 12 hours at most. Technology experts presented Marcus's phone data, showing his internet searches about body disposal and his GPS coordinates placing him at Willow Creek Forest during the critical time window. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Sarah Bedford, a FBI behavioral analyst who specialized in criminal psychology. She testified about the pattern of Marcus's lies and what they revealed. Mr. Henderson has told 6 different stories about what happened to Charlie Mitchell, Bedford explained. This is not the behavior of someone who is deliberately obfuscating to prevent discovery of evidence. Each story was designed to explain why a body wouldn't be found. He was with relatives far away, he was sold to anonymous people, he was cremated, he was in the river. These are the tactics of someone who knows exactly what happened and is determined to ensure the truth never comes to light. The defense's case was weak and relied primarily on the absence of a body. Chambers argued that without definitive proof of death, reasonable doubt existed. He suggested that perhaps Charlie had been taken by someone else, that perhaps Jessica had harmed her own son and was blaming Marcus, that perhaps Charlie had wandered away and met with misfortune from another source entirely. But these arguments felt hollow against the weight of evidence. Marcus did not take the stand in his own defense. His attorney knew that his multiple conflicting statements would destroy him under cross-examination. The defense called several character witnesses who testified that Marcus could be kind and helpful when he wanted to be. They called an expert who questioned whether the blood evidence definitively proved fatal injury. They called a search and rescue coordinator who admitted that despite extensive efforts, Charlie's body had not been found. But none of it was enough to overcome the prosecution's case. In his closing argument, James Keller stood before the jury and spoke with quiet intensity. Charlie Mitchell was 3 years old. He loved dinosaurs. He trusted everyone. He called Marcus Henderson Mark and tried to make him smile. And Marcus Henderson, rather than protecting this innocent child, rather than being the man Charlie deserved, chose violence. He threw a 3-year-old boy across a room with such force that Charlie's head struck a coffee table and began bleeding profusely. He refused to allow medical help. He waited for Charlie to die. And then he put that little boy's body in a duffel bag and drove out to Willow Creek Forest in the middle of the night and disposed of him like garbage. The defense wants you to believe that because we haven't found Charlie's body, you can't be sure he's dead. But ladies and gentlemen, think about what that means. If Charlie is alive, where is he? He's not with family, they've been searching desperately for him. He's not with friends. He was 3 years old and had no friends outside his immediate family. He hasn't been seen at any hospital, any school, any store. There have been no sightings despite a massive media campaign and thousands of tips investigated. Charlie Mitchell is dead. He died on June 11, 2018, from injuries inflicted by Marcus Henderson. And Marcus Henderson has spent the last 2 years lying about what he did with that little boy's body because he knows that body is evidence of his guilt. Don't let him get away with murder because he was successful at hiding the evidence. Look at all the evidence we do have. Look at the blood. Look at the lies. Look at the violence. Look at the consciousness of guilt. and find Marcus Henderson guilty of taking Charlie Mitchell's life. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On March 18, 2020, they returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Helen Rodriguez collapsed in tears in the courtroom gallery. Jessica sat with her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Marcus Henderson showed no emotion whatsoever, staring straight ahead as if the verdict had nothing to do with him. At sentencing a month later, Judge Thomas McCarthy addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Henderson, you have been convicted of murdering a 3-year-old child who did nothing to deserve the violence you inflicted upon him. You have shown no remorse. You have refused to tell this child's family where you put his body, denying them even the small comfort of being able to lay him to rest properly. You have demonstrated that you are a danger to society and particularly to the most vulnerable among us, children. The law allows me only one appropriate sentence." Judge McCarthy sentenced Marcus Henderson to life in prison without the possibility of parole. If this case has affected you as deeply as it has affected us, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Cases like Charlie's need to be remembered. Children like Charlie need voices speaking for them. Your engagement helps us continue this important work. Marcus Henderson's conviction brought some measure of justice, but for Helen Rodriguez and Jessica Mitchell, the pain continued. Charlie's body had never been found. There was no grave to visit, no place to leave flowers, no final goodbye. Helen became an advocate for missing children, working with organizations that supported families of missing and murdered children. She attended every parole hearing for other offenders, spoke at schools about recognizing signs of child abuse, and kept Charlie's memory alive through a foundation established in his name. The Charlie's Light Foundation provided support to young mothers in crisis, offering resources to help them protect their children and escape abusive situations. Helen believed that if Jessica had had more support, more resources, more guidance, perhaps Charlie would still be alive. "I failed my grandson," Helen said in an interview 2 years after the trial. "I saw the signs of Marcus's violence and I didn't do enough. I worked overnight shifts and left my daughter and grandson alone with a monster. I have to live with that. But I can honor Charlie's memory by helping other children, by making sure other families don't go through what we went through." Jessica Mitchell's story was more complicated. Many people blamed her for Charlie's death, arguing that as his mother, she should have protected him at all costs. The internet was vicious, with thousands of comments calling her a murderer, a terrible mother, someone who deserved to be in prison alongside Marcus. Jessica was charged with child endangerment and failure to report a crime. She pled guilty and received a sentence of 3 years in prison, of which she served 18 months. After her release, she moved away from Riverside, trying to build a new life far from the scrutiny and judgment. In a rare interview given 5 years after Charlie's disappearance, Jessica spoke about her guilt and her journey toward healing. "I know people hate me. I understand why. I was Charlie's mother and I failed to protect him. I was young and scared and stupid, and my baby died because of my failures. I'll never forgive myself for that. But I also know that I was a victim too, a victim of Marcus's manipulation and violence, a victim of a system that failed me when I was a child being sexually abused by an adult man. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying the truth is complicated. Every day I think about Charlie. I wonder what he'd be like now. He'd be 8 years old. Would he still love dinosaurs? Would he be good at math? Would he have friends? I'll never know. And that's my punishment, living the rest of my life without my son, knowing I could have saved him if I'd just been braver." If there are mothers out there in abusive situations, mothers who are scared, who don't think they can leave, who are protecting someone who's hurting their children, please, I'm begging you, get out. Call the police. Call a shelter. Do whatever you have to do. Don't wait. Don't think it will get better. It won't. I waited, and my son died. Don't make my mistake. The search for Charlie's body never stopped. Every few months, search teams returned to Willow Creek Forest and surrounding areas, hoping that changing seasons or erosion might reveal something previously hidden. Tips continued to come in. Someone thought they saw a child's shoe, someone remembered seeing Marcus in a different area that night, someone had a dream about where Charlie might be. Each tip was investigated. None led to Charlie. In 2022, 4 years after Charlie's disappearance, cadaver dogs alerted to an area in the northeastern section of Willow Creek Forest that hadn't been thoroughly searched before. The location was remote, accessible only by hiking 2 miles through dense undergrowth. Excavation teams spent weeks carefully digging and sifting through soil. They found animal bones. They found old camping equipment. They found nothing that belonged to Charlie Mitchell. Detective Sarah Chen, who had led the original investigation, retired in 2023 but continued to consult on Charlie's case as a volunteer. In an interview on the 5th anniversary of Charlie's disappearance, she reflected on the case that had defined her career. "I've worked hundreds of cases involving children. Some we solved, some we didn't. Some children were found alive, some weren't. But Charlie's case stays with me every single day. It's the picture on my desk at home, that sweet little boy with his dinosaur, that smile that could light up a room. We got justice in the courtroom, but we haven't brought Charlie home. That haunts me." Marcus Henderson knows where Charlie is. He's the only one who knows. And he's chosen to take that secret to his grave. I've visited him in prison 3 times over the years, trying to appeal to whatever humanity might exist in him. I've told him that telling us where Charlie is wouldn't change his sentence, he's never getting out. I've told him that giving the family closure would be the one good thing he could do with his life. Each time, he just stares at me with those empty eyes and says nothing. But I haven't given up. Cases like this sometimes break open years later. Someone in a prison cell might hear something. Erosion might expose a grave. A deathbed confession might come. I won't stop hoping that someday, we'll bring Charlie home. Marcus Henderson adjusted to prison life with disturbing ease. Incarcerated at Oregon State Penitentiary, he maintained the same emotionless demeanor that had characterized him throughout the investigation and trial. Prison officials classified him as a manipulative offender with psychopathic traits. He had no interest in rehabilitation programs and refused all offers of counseling. He spent his days working in the prison laundry, reading, and watching television. He had no visitors and no correspondence with anyone outside the prison walls. Other inmates largely avoided him. In prison culture, those who harm children occupy the lowest rung of the social hierarchy. Marcus was assaulted twice in his first year of incarceration, once beaten severely enough to require hospitalization. After the second assault, he was transferred to protective custody, where he lived in isolation from the general population. Prison psychologist Dr. Raymond Martinez evaluated Marcus annually as part of routine assessments. His reports painted a chilling picture of a man completely lacking in empathy or remorse. Mr. Henderson shows no emotional response when discussing the victim, Dr. Martinez wrote in a 2021 assessment. He refers to the child as the boy or the kid, never by name. When asked if he feels guilt about what happened, he said, "Why would I? It's done. Feeling bad won't change it." When asked if he ever thinks about the victim's family, he said, "Not really. That's their problem, not mine." This is consistent with antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic features. Mr. Henderson lacks the capacity for genuine remorse or empathy. He views other people as objects to be used or obstacles to be removed. He does not see himself as having done anything wrong. In his worldview, the problem was that he got caught, not that he committed murder. Several journalists attempted to interview Marcus over the years, hoping he might finally reveal what happened to Charlie's body. He refused every request. The one journalist who was granted a brief interview through written correspondence received only cryptic responses. When asked where Charlie's body was located, Marcus wrote, "Where all lost things go eventually." When asked if he felt anything about what he'd done, he wrote, "I feel that people are too sensitive about death. We all die. The kid died younger than most. That's all." When asked if he would ever tell the family where to find Charlie, he wrote, "Why? It won't bring him back. It won't change anything. Let them wonder. It gives their lives purpose." The callousness of these responses generated public outrage. Victims' rights advocates called for laws that would allow additional charges or penalties for offenders who refuse to disclose the location of victims' remains. In 2023, Oregon passed Charlie's Law, legislation that allowed prosecutors to charge convicted murderers with an additional felony, abuse of a corpse with intent to obstruct justice, if they refuse to reveal the location of their victims' bodies. The law carried a sentence of up to 10 additional years in prison and made offenders ineligible for any form of early release or sentence reduction. The law came too late for Charlie's case. Marcus was already serving life without parole, but supporters hoped it might provide leverage in future cases and offer some comfort to families seeking closure. Charlie Mitchell was real. He wasn't just a case number or a statistic. He was a little boy who liked chocolate chip pancakes and carried a stuffed dinosaur everywhere. He deserved to grow up, to go to school, to make friends, to fall in love, to have children of his own someday. Marcus Henderson stole all of that from him. And somewhere, Charlie waits to be found. If this story has touched you, if you believe Charlie's memory deserves to be honored, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story as widely as you can. Someone watching might have information. Someone might remember seeing something that night in 2018. Someone might be the key to finally bringing Charlie home. Don't let him be forgotten. Every share is a chance for justice. Every subscription helps us continue investigating cases like this. And every like tells us that these stories matter, that these children matter. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on this case. What do you think happened to Charlie? Do you believe he'll ever be found? Have you been affected by a similar case? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments.